Also, an exit hole inside the Pentagon is not explained by any official report. Despite what might have hit the building, why it was hit is much more important. Norman Mineta was Secretary of Transportation from 2001 to 2006. On the morning of September 11th, when the first plane struck the World Trade Center, Mineta headed to the White House to enter the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, or PEOC. At the May 2003 hearing of the 9/11 Commission, Mineta testified the following.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?
However, the 9/11 Commission concludes that Dick Cheney did not reach the PEOC until 9:58, more than half an hour later. The Secret Service claims that it has no record of when Dick Cheney entered the bunker. What were the orders? If they were to intercept Flight 77, why was it allowed to strike the Pentagon?
Let's go to the trade tower again, because, John, we now have what do we have? We don't...
It looks like a new plume, a new large plume of smoke.
That's the scene at this moment at the World Trade Center. Stan Daler from ABC's Good Morning America is down in the general vicinity. Dan, can you tell us what has just happened?
Yes, Peter, it's Don Daler down here, 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it's folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
Generally speaking, for a building to collapse in on itself like that, it would seem to indicate that there could have been an explosion, a bomb planted on the ground that would make the building collapse within itself.
10 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, just collapsing on itself. This is a place where thousands of people work. We have no idea what caused this.
Almost looks like one of those planned implosions.
If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
New York City, New York. The South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses to the ground in approximately 10 seconds. 29 minutes later, the North Tower follows suit, collapsing in approximately 10 seconds. Later that evening at 5:20 p.m., World Trade Center Building 7, a 47-story skyscraper 300 feet from the North Tower, suddenly collapses. The official explanation is that falling debris from the North Tower created a series of fatal fires inside the building. If this is true, it would be the third steel-framed skyscraper in history to collapse due to damage and fire. The first two would be the Twin Towers. August 5th, 1970. One New York Plaza, a 50-story office building, burned for over 6 hours between the 32nd and 36th floors. It did not collapse. February 23rd, 1991. One Meridian Plaza, a 38-story skyscraper in Philadelphia, burned for 18 hours across 8 floors. It is later described by officials as the most significant fire of the century. It did not collapse. May 4th, 1988. First Interstate Bank, a 62-story skyscraper in Los Angeles, California, burns for almost 4 hours, destroying 4 floors and damaging a 5th. It was one of the most destructive fires in United States history. The building did not collapse. Even the Twin Towers survived a number of fires. First, a series of fires in 1975, one of which was described as fighting a blowtorch. Then, another in 1999 on the 104th floor of the North Tower. Yet on September 11, 2001, the Twin Towers burned for 56 and 103 minutes before collapsing completely to the ground. One might argue that this was due to their construction. The Twin Towers were composed of 200,000 tons of steel, 425,000 cubic yards of concrete, 106 elevators, 43,600 windows, and a 360-foot television antenna atop the North Tower. The core of each tower was a rectangular pillar, 87 by 133 feet, comprised of 47 steel box columns ranging from 36 by 16 to 52 by 22 inches. The North Tower was completed in 1970, standing at 1,368 feet tall, and the South Tower was completed in 1973, clocking in at 1,362 feet tall, making them the tallest buildings in the world at the time. They were designed to withstand multiple impacts from a Boeing 707, which was the largest aircraft at the time. And we are told that these massive structures were destroyed by 10,000 gallons of jet fuel. A perfectly symmetrical collapse resulting from asymmetrical damage, with the collapse following the path of greatest resistance. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, eventually concluded in August 2005 that they found no evidence suggesting that the Twin Towers were brought down in a controlled demolition. It's funny they would name it the Report on the Collapse of the Twin Towers, because the report does not explain how the Twin Towers actually collapsed, claiming that it does not actually include the structural behavior of the tower after initiation was reached and collapse became inevitable. 10,000 pages, and not a single one to actually explain how the towers came down the way they did. NIST admitted in April 2007 that they are unable to provide a full explanation of the total collapse, and also that they conducted no tests for explosive residue. Luckily, somebody has.
My name is Jeanette McKinley. I was a resident of Lower Manhattan, living directly across the street from the World Trade Center on September 11th. I've been living there for 4 years. I loved living there. When I think back about it, it's really the time of my life. And so on September 11th, I was I was writing emails. I was sitting at my computer, boom. I could immediately see the flames. I was close enough that I could literally just turn my head and there it was with the building burning. I was with my friend Jim Lecce. We watched everything out the window. He was fixated taking photographs, and whenever I mentioned leaving, he never wanted to leave. He said to me, "This is history. Don't you realize we are watching history happen? We're part of history. Why would we leave?" I was in the kitchen. I was in my kitchen. I had flowers in my hand, and the building starts coming down. Our windows blew in. He came running across the apartment. "Get out of here, the building is coming down." Well, it sounded like it was coming down on us. That cloud, there was a debris cloud created by when the Tower 2 fell. It created a debris cloud, which became part of our life because it just burst in our window at 50 miles an hour. That whole cloud just came. bursting in, and many people were wanting to investigate whether the collapses were actually controlled demolitions, as many people thought on the very day. Even the news commentators thought they were controlled demolitions. So there was a lot of controversy about whether they were or not. And friends of mine that knew that I had the dust were also knew a scientist, Stephen Jones, and at BYU.
My name is Dr. Stephen Jones. I have a PhD in physics from Vanderbilt University, 1978. I have a Bachelor of Science degree from Brigham Young University, 1973. I graduated magna cum laude. I went after the PhD work, I did postdoctoral work at Los Alamos Maison Physics Facility. In June 2007, I was examining a dust sample, which I'd obtained from Jeanette McKinley. I was using a loupe and also just looking at it with my eyes and an ordinary optical microscope, although stereo, so that I could see better in 3 dimensions. And what I found was a chip that looked like it might be a paint chip. I mean, early on I was thinking, maybe not too interesting. But this chip was rather striking in its appearance. It had an orange-red color, first of all. And then I found several of these, and they all had some gray material adhering to the side of the red material. So layered. Later we found multiple layers, but most of these chips have 2 layers, red, gray. I did take one of these chips then to the electron microscope, the scanning electron microscope, and we looked at it with the electron microscope, and then we used a system where we could determine the elements. What we found in the red material is a combination of aluminum and iron oxide, and these are the components of thermite. Of course, now we looked with an electron microscope, we looked deeper and deeper, higher and higher magnification. And I pulled in a colleague of mine, Dr. Jeffrey Ferrer. He's an expert on the electron microscope machine. So he actually broke a piece off of one of these red chips, and then later he did 4 different samples, broke a piece off. That gives you a fresh surface. Because in the dust, there's all sorts of stuff. There's zinc and titanium and calcium, all sorts of stuff. So he broke off a tip, you see, so we can look at a fresh surface. And then what you see in all 4 samples that we studied in this detail: carbon, which is significant, oxygen, iron, and aluminum. We looked at this, and these again are the ingredients, except for the carbon. And we found that experimenters working with superthermite, trying to beef it up, make it more explosive, tailoring it to different weapons applications, they would have silicon in there and an organic material, which means a carbon. So a polymer such as Viton, they would add to this to give it the properties they wanted. So that fit. Now, see, that was surprising to me to see silicon and carbon, but then we find in the literature that's what these guys are doing in the weapons labs, Livermore and Los Alamos. They're adding organic, because that gives you a gas production. When the thermite goes off, now you also have gas production, which gives you the explosive force, for instance. I suggested that we take a sample of this red-gray chip material and run it through a very sensitive instrument called a differential scanning calorimeter. And he did that. What it does, you heat the temperature slowly, and the material will react if it's going to. And if it reacts and produces heat, you'll get a spike in your calorimeter. And then if it reacts quickly, it'll be a narrow spike. If it, say, burns over a long period of time, you'll see a big broad spike. And the total area there is the total amount of energy released. And it gives you a lot of information. What we found, what Dr. Ferrer found first, and he was real excited when he told me about this, he took one of these chips and he put it in the differential scanning calorimeter. And sure enough, it went off at right about 430 centigrade, but more importantly, the peak was high, which means a lot of energy released, and narrow, which means, in his terms, it blew up. You know, you say, man, this is it. This stuff blows up. It behaves just like nano. It has the ingredients of nanothermite. He said, well, there should be, in a thermite reaction, you should produce molten iron. So you should see some spheres of iron. Think of spraying water in the air, and you get droplets that are more or less spherical because the surface tension pulls the liquid into a sphere. It's very simple. Same thing with molten iron from the thermitic reaction, whether it's ordinary conventional thermite or the super nanothermite. Either way, you get this molten iron, and you should get these droplets of iron. So he said, we got to look for those. You know, if you don't find those, maybe who knows what it is, but we got to find droplets of molten iron. Otherwise, we're not sure we had the thermite reaction, the thermitic reaction. In this case, it's a nanothermite. So we looked, and wow, what a beautiful sight. As you look at this, after the red materials reacted, there are these little spheres, just tons of them. And we compared the traces that we got in this sophisticated calorimeter with traces obtained with known thermite. These are published data, and our peak is actually narrower. I mean, this stuff goes off with very rapidly, and more energy also than had been reported by these other researchers working with known nanothermite.
As if explosive residue in the dust was not enough, there are other disturbing aspects of the Twin Towers collapse. Both the North and South Tower collapsed at nearly free-fall speed, 110 stories, reducing itself to a pile of twisted steel and pulverized concrete and building materials in approximately 10 seconds. The Twin Towers combined contained almost 500,000 tons of concrete. This was turned into particles the size of talcum powder, blanketing lower Manhattan in a fine dust. It also turns out that molten metal exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit was discovered in the rubble of Ground Zero, underneath the Twin Towers and Building 7. Firefighters, emergency workers, police, officials, even Rudy Giuliani testified to these massive temperatures. Even after heavy rain on September 14th and 21st, a constant stream of fire retardants and water described as creating a giant lake. These fires were not put out until December 13th, 2001, making it the longest burning structural fire in history. If one were going to bring down the Twin Towers in a controlled manner, you would have to simultaneously sever the 47 central support columns at the base of the building. Maybe that's why a large number of eyewitnesses reported massive explosions at the base of the Twin Towers, some before the planes had even impacted the building. In fact, large amounts of white smoke appear at the base of the South Tower just minutes before its collapse. Do you still think that jet fuel brought down the Twin Towers? In almost all the videos of the collapses, violent ejections appear 20 to 60 stories below the demolition wave. Here, 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 and here. I know what you're thinking. If explosives or incendiaries were in the building, how would they get in there without anyone noticing? A December 2000 assessment of the World Trade Center recommended immediate renovation work on the steel columns contained within elevator shafts of both Twin Towers. Turner Construction, a company located on the 38th floor of the North Tower, was selected to do the job. Turner's CEO at the time was Tom Leppard, who had personal ties to George W. Bush and Carlos Gutierrez, Secretary of the Department of Commerce. The Department of Commerce is in charge of NIST, an agency that may sound familiar. Turner Construction also did fireproofing work on the very floors that were struck by Flights 11 and 175. Of course, all documents pertaining to Turner's work on the Twin Towers were destroyed on 9/11. In addition, President Bush's brother, Marvin, was on the board of directors at Securicom from 1993 until fiscal year 2000. Securicom, later known as Stratesec, was an electronic security company backed by Kuwait American Corporation, which provided security for United Airlines, Dulles International Airport, and from the early 1990s up to 9/11, the World Trade Center. According to the Port Authority, there are no records pertaining to the work that the company performed on the World Trade Center. So, a company with ties to the government agency that eventually investigated the collapse was responsible for doing renovation work inside the Twin Towers, and the building's security was run by a company with family ties to President Bush. And we have no records to prove what they did inside the buildings. Nothing suspicious there.
I often get asked, well, how did they use this nanothermite in the buildings? It's as if there are people just trying to cast doubt, as if you can't explain everything, you have nothing. That's of course absurd. We have found unexploded, but explosive material in the dust. Now the next step is to find out who did it. So in other words, we've done the forensic CSI style science. Now we need the criminal investigation to go along with that, to find out who could have made the stuff, first of all, and then who did make it. And then from there we can find out who ordered it being made and why.
If only we could have examined the steel from the World Trade Center. Unfortunately, the debris was almost immediately shipped overseas, being sold to the lowest bidder. This is destruction and removal of evidence from a crime scene. Family members and engineers were outraged at the decision and demanded that the steel be preserved for investigation. Bill Manning of Fire Engineering magazine publicly labeled the cleanup at Ground Zero a half-baked farce. Yet the operation continued until the site was officially clear on May 30th, 2002. Regardless of how it was done or who was responsible, what happened to the Twin Towers seems obvious enough. They were brought down in a highly engineered, unconventional, controlled demolition. It was a psychological attack on the American people, and it was pulled off with military precision. a.m., Shanksville, Pennsylvania. United Airlines Flight 93 allegedly crashes into an abandoned strip mine at 580 miles per hour, 20 minutes flying time from Washington, D.C. Speculation ran rampant that the plane had been shot down. First, the story was that passengers overtook the plane and sacrificed themselves to prevent further casualties. The 9/11 Commission eventually concluded that hijacker Ziad Jarrah crashed the plane into the ground. They also claim that the military did not know about Flight 93 until 10:07 a.m., 4 minutes after it had allegedly crashed. So, what trace was left of Flight 93?
Yeah, we want to take our viewers live to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Our Brian Cavell is standing by. This, of course, is the site where United Airlines Flight 93 crashed on its way from Newark to San Francisco, crashed on Tuesday. And I understand in this investigation there's some breaking news. Brian, what can you tell us?
Well, Darren, in the last hour or so, the FBI and the state police here have confirmed that they have cordoned off a second area about 6 to 8 miles away from the crater here where this plane went down. This is apparently another debris site, which raises a number of questions. Why would debris from the plane, and they identified it specifically as being from this plane, why would debris be located 6 miles away? Could it have blown that far away? Seems highly unlikely. Almost all the debris found at this site is within 100 yards, 200 yards away. So it raises some questions. We don't want to over-speculate, of course.
It seems to me from covering a number of plane crashes on the scene that, if nothing else, you can say this is not typical for a plane crash to be spread across an area this large.
It certainly doesn't make sense because most of the debris has been found in a very compact area, within 100 yards, 200 yards, maybe a little beyond that. And then all of a sudden they're telling us 6 miles away they have another concentration of debris. They say it's very small pieces. Most of these are very small pieces. Most of the pieces here are no bigger than the size of a briefcase, they say, and the pieces 6 miles away maybe even smaller than that.
As for the crash site itself, from the Somerset County coroner to the mayor of Shanksville, almost every eyewitness would remark how little of the plane and its passengers remained at the actual crash site.
We have rescue vehicles that came in earlier in the day and they have turned up nothing. No one believed to be alive from this crash within the last hour. I want to get quickly to Chris Kanicki. He's a photographer with the Pittsburgh affiliate, the Fox affiliate. He was back there just a couple of minutes ago, and Chris, I've seen the pictures. It looks like there's nothing there except for a hole in the ground.
Basically, that's right. The only thing you could see from where we were was a big gouge in the earth and some broken trees. We could see some people walking around in the area, but from where we could see, there wasn't much left.
Any large pieces of debris at all?
No, there was nothing that you could distinguish that a plane had crashed there.
Smoke, fire?
Nothing. It was absolutely quiet. It was actually very quiet. Just a couple of people walking around. They looked like part of the NTSB crew walking around looking at the pieces.
How big would you say that hole was?
From my estimates, I would guess it was probably about 20 to 15 feet long and probably about 10 feet long, or 10 feet wide.
What could you see on the ground, if anything, other than dirt and ash? And
you couldn't see anything. You could just see dirt, ash, and people walking around, broken trees.
There is zero historical precedent for a large commercial airplane and its passengers completely disintegrating upon impact, regardless of speed, cause, or crash site. Turkish Airlines Flight 981 began breaking apart in mid-air after suffering extreme decompression and crashed into a forest. All 346 people were killed. 40 bodies were recovered, 6 of them still in their seats. Air India Flight 182 was blown up in mid-air by a bomb over the Atlantic Ocean. Wreckage from the plane and 131 bodies were recovered, with autopsies performed. Japan Airlines Flight 123 suffered mechanical failures 12 minutes into its flight and crashed into a mountain. It remains the single deadliest aircraft incident in history. Wreckage and even 4 survivors out of the 500 passengers were recovered. Those are just 3 examples. And yet, on September 11th, 2001, we are told that a 757 crashed into a field and left virtually no identifiable wreckage or passengers. The Department of Environmental Protection also reported in October 2001 that no trace of jet fuel was found in groundwater or soil at the crash site. Flight 93 allegedly crashed with over 5,000 gallons, 37,500 pounds of jet fuel left. How is this possible? In 2006, during the trial of the alleged 20th hijacker Zacharias Moussaoui, the FBI provided a batch of evidence that allegedly survived a catastrophic crash in near-perfect condition. Among the exhibits were a red bandana, a Kingdom of Saudi Arabia driver's license, John Talignani's driver's license, and flight attendant C.C. Lyle's personal effects, including her driver's license and Marriott hotel card. Although a 757 managed to obliterate itself upon impact, fragile material known as paper and fabric managed to survive nearly without a scratch. The FBI also releases pictures of an engine and 2 pieces of fuselage. It is unspecified where those were found. What really happened near Shanksville, Pennsylvania on 9/11 remains a mystery. But one thing seems clear. A 757 did not crash intact into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
It was pretty clear at one point, and then there's a whole bunch of smoke and glass. And I think we're just about the last ones in this building right now. I think you should leave. Everybody else is gone. I'll just make sure that there's nobody else coming downstairs. I hit the top of the building and fell down.
In 1984, construction began on World Trade Center Building 7, a 47-story office building 300 feet away from the North Tower. It opened to the public in 1987 and housed offices for Department of Defense, Internal Revenue Service, and was also the Secret Service's largest field office. Building 7 was considered the Central Intelligence Agency's largest station outside of Washington, D.C. The details of the office's functions remain classified. The Securities and Exchange Commission was also using the building to store 3,000 to 4,000 files related to their investigations. And of course, they have no record of what those files were. On June 8, 1999, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management Command Center on the 23rd floor is opened.
The new facility is located in downtown Manhattan, across the street from the World Trade Center's Twin Towers. The command center on the 23rd floor is bulletproof and bomb-resistant, with its own air supply and generators. It's linked to city airports, the Coast Guard, and the Pentagon. Computers will soon have detailed blueprints of every major building in New York City, as well as evacuation routes. Hurricanes and heat waves would be handled here, as well as terrorist attacks. Though New York officials say their facility is not impenetrable, they're confident it could handle even the worst crisis imaginable. Deborah Thayerick for CNN, New York.
On the morning of 9/11, before the first plane strikes the North Tower, Building 7's alarm system was unexpectedly placed on test status at 6:47 a.m. for a scheduled period of 8 hours. This normally occurs during maintenance, and any fire alarms from the building were to be disregarded. After the second plane strikes the South Tower, Building 7's power was deliberately shut off and its tenants evacuated. Following the collapse of the North Tower, almost all of the surrounding World Trade Center buildings were completely destroyed, but the structures remained standing. Building 3, a 22-story building directly below the Twin Towers, was split in half by the South Tower's collapse. Although the building was severely crushed by falling debris, the structure remained standing. Building 4, a 9-story building east of the South Tower, was almost completely flattened. The remaining structure did not collapse. Building 5, a 9-story building east of the North Tower, suffered from severe fires and structural damage. Building 6, an 8-story building between the North Tower and Building 7, suffered a giant gouge in its roof and severe fires. Neither Building 5 or 6 suffered a collapse. Neither did the Deutsche Bank building, which stands to this day and is currently being demolished beam by beam. Neither did the Millennium Hotel across the street. Building 7, a 47-story office building hundreds of feet away, burns controllably over a few floors and suffers structural damage to its south face before collapsing completely to the ground at near free-fall speed. The collapse of Building 7 was rarely reported on the day of and after 9/11.
Yeah, it's very strange that was not even hit by a jet, and then it falls very rapidly and essentially straight down into its footprint.
Although the collapse of Building 7 was clearly a phenomenon and further investigation was needed, the building's steel was removed from the site and destroyed. No pieces were recovered from the debris for analysis. However, FEMA's volunteer investigators revealed after their limited studies that some pieces of steel from the rubble of Building 7 experienced something never before seen in an office fire. Some pieces of steel had large holes burned through them, evidence that a high-temperature corrosive material had formed and burned through the beams, suggesting temperatures of over 1,000 degrees Celsius were present.
But what the Worcester Polytechnic Institute scientists reported was that steel, as they looked at it, using similar methods to what we've used on the red gray chips. These are electron microscope methods and X-ray EDS methods. They found high temperature, indication of very high temperatures, oxidation and sulfidation, sulfur in the steel.
Yet, this phenomenon will not be mentioned again, either by FEMA or other agencies investigating the collapse.
Now let's fast forward to August of last year, 2008. NIST finally came out with their preliminary report. Now, it's very interesting. They ruled out diesel fuel fires. They said it is due, and they also ruled out any type of fatal damage from the towers collapsing, particularly the North Tower, which is across the street, Vesey Street, I think. And so there's some damage, sure, but they ruled out it was not fatal, and it did not contribute to the initiation of the collapse. That's what NIST said, and I agree with that.
When questioned at a public comment session after the draft's release, NIST was forced to acknowledge that the collapse of WTC-7 experienced a period of freefall for 105 feet.
That is acceleration at 32.2 feet per second squared, which is just dropping a ball in a vacuum, and that's how fast it accelerates. Finally, in their final report, they have this agreement, having been with Chandler and with my comment also, that there was indeed acceleration, not just constant speed, and acceleration at the acceleration due to gravity. In other words, free fall. And they even mentioned free fall for about 105 feet. That's about 8 stories. Now that means, according to what they had previously said in August, which is correct, earlier, August 26th, nothing is in the way of the roof. Nothing. Now you can see in the videos, there's a lot of floors still intact as the roof is moving as a block. So somewhere down below, there's about 8 floors that have been obliterated. I mean, you can't just have the floors sitting there stationary, because that would be mass in the way, and that would slow this acceleration down. Nothing's in the way. The only way I can see how to do that is with controlled demolition, with explosives to remove that. That's what you do in controlled demolition. You get all this material out of the way, then the upper block travels at close to free fall. In this case, at free fall. It's really amazing.
It's funny Stephen would mention explosives and material being removed. 2 eyewitnesses independently claimed to news channels on 9/11 that they experienced an explosion inside the lower levels of Building 7. The first one is Michael Hess, who went on to UPN 9 News around 11:59 a.m.
Oil refineries in Louisiana.
We have Frank Ucierto back on the phone with us, Brenda, with some New York City officials. Frank, go ahead.
That's right. I'm standing here right now just off Broadway by City Hall with Michael Hess, who is the city's corporation counsel. Mr. Hess, you were trapped in, I believe, 7 World Trade Center. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I was. I was up in the emergency management center on the 23rd floor, and when all the power went out in the building, another gentleman and I walked down to the 8th floor where there was an explosion, and we've been trapped on the 8th floor with smoke, thick smoke all around us for about an hour and a half. But the New York Fire Department, as terrific as they are, just came and got us out.
And the second is Barry Jennings, who went on to ABC7 shortly after noon.
We're going to bring more of those to you now. Barry Jennings, you're on the 8th floor. You work for the City Housing Department. Explain to me the moment of impact.
Well, me and Mr. Hess, the corporation counsel, were on the 21st floor. I told him we got to get out of here. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew it back into the 8th floor. And I turned to Hess. I said, "This is it. We're dead. We're not going to make it out of here." I took a fire extinguisher and I bust the window out. That's when this gentleman here heard my cries for help.
We tracked Barry down in June 2007 to interview him and hopefully elaborate on his experience.
Hi, my name is Barry Jennings.
I'm 52 years old. I've worked for 33 years in one location. Basically, that's it. I'm married, father of 4. It was very funny. I was on my way to work. Traffic was excellent. I received a call. A small Cessna had hit the World Trade Center. I was asked to go and man the Office of Emergency Management at the World Trade Center 7 on the 23rd floor. As I arrived there were police all in the lobby. They showed me the way to the elevator. We got up to the 23rd floor. Me and Mr. Hess, who I didn't know was Mr. Hess at the time, we got to the 23rd floor. We couldn't get in. We had to go back down. Then security and police took us to the freight elevators where they took us back up, and we did get in. Upon arriving into the OEM EOC, we noticed that everybody was gone. I saw coffee that was on the desk. Still, the smoke was still coming off the coffee. I saw half-eaten sandwiches. And only me, Mr. Hess, was up there. After I called several individuals, one individual told me that to leave and leave right away. Mr. Hess came running back in and said, "We're the only ones up here, we gotta get out of here." He found the stairwell. When we reached the 8th or the 6th floor, the landing that we were standing on gave way. There was an explosion and the landing gave way. And I was left there hanging. I had to climb back up, and now I had to walk back up to the 8th floor. After getting to the 8th floor, everything was dark. It was dark and it was very, very hot. Very hot. I asked Mr. Hess to test the phones as I took a fire extinguisher and broke out the windows. Once I broke out the windows, I could see outside below me. I saw police cars on fire, buses on fire. I looked one way, the building was there. I looked the other way, it was gone. I was trapped in there for several hours. I was trapped in there when both buildings came down. The firefighters came, they came to the window, because I was going to come out on the fire hose. I didn't want to stay there anymore, it was too hot. I was going to come out on the fire hose. They came to the window, they started yelling, "Do not do that, it won't hold you." And then they ran away. See, I didn't know what was going on. That's when the first tower fell. When they started running, the first tower was coming down. I had no way of knowing that. Then I saw them come back. Now I saw them come back with more concern on their faces. And then they ran away again. The second tower fell. So as they turned and ran the second time, the guy said, "Don't worry, we'll be back for you." And they did come back. This time they came back with 10 firefighters. And they kept asking, "Where are you? We don't know where you are." I said, "I'm on the north side of the building," because when I was on the stairs, I saw north side. All this time, I'm hearing all types of explosions. All this time, I'm hearing explosions. And I'm thinking that maybe it's the buses around me that were on fire, the cars on fire. I don't see no, but I'm still hearing these explosions. When they finally got to us, and they took us down to what they called the lobby, because I asked them, I said, when we got down there, I said, "Where are we?" He said, "This was the lobby." And I said, "You gotta be kidding me." It was total ruins. Total ruins. Now keep in mind, when I came in there, the lobby had nice escalators. It was a huge lobby. And for me to see what I saw, it was unbelievable. And the firefighter that took us down kept saying, "Do not look down." And I kept saying, "Why?" He said, "Do not look down." And we were stepping over people. And you can feel when you're stepping over people. They took us out through a hole that I don't know who made this hole in this wall. That's how they got us out. They took us out through a hole, through the wall, to safety. As they were taking me out, one firefighter had fallen. I believe he was having a heart attack. But before that, this big giant police officer came to me. And he says, "You have to run." I said, "I can't run, my knees are swollen." He said, "You'll have to get on your knees and crawl in." He said, "Because we have reports of more explosions." And that's when I started crawling. And I saw this guy fall behind me. his comrades came to his aid and dragged him to safety. I was looking for an ambulance for my knees, and at that time they told me you gotta walk 20 blocks to refuge. Before I got there, Eyewitness News grabbed me and started interviewing me. And that's basically it.
This is where the story takes a turn for the worst. In late August 2008, comments began appearing on YouTube videos of Barry's testimony, claiming he had passed away on August 19, 2008. 2 days before NIST releases its draft report on WTC-7, which directly contradicts Barry's testimony and claims that no explosions occurred inside the building. They explicitly claim there were no witness reports of such a loud noise. To date, the only publicly available information is that Barry was in perfect health before suddenly being admitted to the hospital and subsequently passing away on August 19, 2008. A private investigator, when hired to investigate the disappearance of Barry Jennings, replied, "Due to some of the information I have uncovered, I have determined that this is a job for the police. I have refunded your credit card. Please do not contact me again concerning this individual." In conclusion, 2 men inside World Trade Center Building 7, a skyscraper that housed numerous government agencies whose duties are unknown to the public, are almost killed by an explosion before either of the Twin Towers fell. Although it is damaged far less than any other surrounding World Trade Center buildings, at 5:20 p.m., it collapses into its own footprint, experiencing 105 feet of freefall and barely damaging surrounding structures. And the official government report, which takes almost 7 years to write, says it was all due to fire.